Thank you everybody for coming along this afternoon to Natural Hazards Research Australia's 2024 Disaster Challenge online briefing number 1. My name is Brendon McAtee. We have a couple of my colleagues from Natural Hazards Research Australia here, Ethel and Varna. And to help us think about this challenge a little later on, we have Deb Parkins Kerry Haby from the Inspector General for Emergency Management, IGEM, which is called IGEM in Victoria, and a little video from another colleague of ours who's been thinking about this challenge with us, Associate Professor Jonathan Abrahams from Monash University. We'll hear a little bit of a video from him a little bit later on. First, what I'd like to do is just pay my respects to elders past and present for our First Nations communities around the country. I'm coming to you today from Noongar country in Western Australia. I'm located in the Whadjuk area of the Whadjuk language group in there. So I'd like to acknowledge all those First Nations people around Australia who might be also those who might be involved in the briefing at the moment, and also from the perspective of the disaster challenge this year. I'll talk a little bit about how we've brought it together in a little bit. A couple of the members of the steering group that have brought that together, a fellow called Sean Hooper from New South Wales, and a colleague of ours, Ollie Costello as well, First Nations researchers and cultural people looking at fire and other kind of things who have been involved in shaping this kind of challenge. So also I'd like to acknowledge them. So this briefing today is really about the disaster challenge, those ideas of what is it, why should you get involved, and what we need to do to be involved. What is the disaster challenge? So you can read what we've got there on the screen, and I'll give you a bit of an idea on it. So Natural Hazards Research Australia is an organisation, if you haven't worked with us before, that has that role in the natural hazard space of really working with a collection of partners and those agencies who are active in emergency management and natural hazards management, who have those a range of challenges to make sure things are being done as well as they can be, and knowledge gaps that they might want to fill. Our role is to work with them, articulate those challenges, and join that up with the research sector to get that bring in new ideas and solve those challenges. That's what Natural Hazards Research Australia is really about. I guess that's the short version. And so we're very much involved with the research sector, working with them to establish research projects to solve those kind of problems that we're talking about. But importantly as well, we do a lot of work in building that community. So we thought about the emergency management sector. We work with the agencies and people in those agencies and practitioners within that space, but also work to develop the next generation of researchers that can start to contribute their skills and expertise into that space as well, as we find the increasing threats from natural hazards across our communities. And this disaster challenge is one of the ways that we really want to work with those new and emerging researchers that are coming through the research sector. So this challenge really works with undergraduates, postgraduates, and early career researchers to bring their skills and expertise together into solving a problem. And so that problem has been developed, the problem statement that we'll see in a moment has been developed through the work of a national steering group. So members from those different agencies that we were talking about, all thinking collectively about what are the challenges that we need to solve within the emergency management sector, and what would be a good challenge to get that collective thinking from across the research sector in towards solving. And so that challenge is a wicked problem, bit of a summary of a wicked problem there. They're really complex. So there's no one solution to these. They're really complex, difficult to solve. And so what we want to start thinking about is, if we can't solve it all at once, what are those pieces that we need to solve? So what are those challenges that we need to solve? How can we articulate problem statements out of that we can solve, and then bring our skills and expertise to solving those problems? So the disaster challenge is about encouraging that kind of thinking on those big issues and bringing that research capability to those things. So talking a bit more about the challenge itself before we get to the challenge question and talk a little bit more about it. So Natural Hazards Research Australia runs this challenge each year. Why would you want to enter it, apart from doing some thinking, meeting some people, really putting your skills and knowledge to good use? So there's a $5,000 cash prize for the winning team. It's set up as an opportunity to really make a difference. So I think, speaking for myself, and I know a bunch of my colleagues, we work in this space because it's important, and we're not just not just for ourselves, but for communities. We know that threats of natural hazard are increasing as climate changes. So we need to help communities and the emergency management sector be able to work together to really build that resilience to those kind of challenges. And this is part of that. For your own team, boosting your credentials, be able to say you've been part of this program, this project, the disaster challenge, and bringing your skills to it to create new and interesting solutions. I think that's really, helps the career kind of side of things. We'll structure this program is structured so you get to build your networks in the emergency management space. So we've got a couple of reps, as I mentioned, from iGEM here today. So meeting different people, getting different thinking and thinking about, well, how does the work that I do, the things that I learn, the studies that I'm involved in, how can I really start to apply that into the EM sector? Career advancement. So we're working on real problems with industry mentors, and talk a little bit about that. So again, really, not just doing the interesting and the interesting high quality research that we do, but how do we actually put that into practice to make a difference? And so all these can be brought together in that area of unlocking that future. If you're interested in the emergency management space, how can that research really start to make a difference there? So I mentioned those kind of ideas. The prize, $5,000 for the winning team. There's also, we'll choose 3 finalists who will pitch in an event to some judges to choose the winning team. Those 2 runners-up will each get $2,000. This is really, Natural Hazards Research Australia really wants to promote the challenge and promote research within the sector. And so we're interested in promoting these concepts more and stimulating that big thinking. There's the opportunity to work more with Natural Hazards Research Australia and its partners. And then opportunities to showcase your ideas and your thinking at forums that we're involved in over the next 12 months. So the disaster challenge is about how you take your knowledge and ideas and your thinking and experience and bring it into that disaster management space to really make a difference. So let's talk about the idea of the wicked problem now. This is, as I say, the output of the steering group that's been thinking about this for a bit of time now. As I mentioned, the wicked problem is complex. It's hard to solve. It has a lot of moving pieces, right? And this year it was an interesting discussion around what's important to the emergency management sector to make it work. And one of the big topics that we talked about, and we're inspired by different people like we have here, Deb and Kerry from iGEM, talking to our First Nations colleagues. What trust is something which is fundamental to the sector. And that can be between people, it can be between people and agencies. Those agencies that have a mandate to help people and communities through natural disasters, respond to those, prepare for those. Trust in, it can be trust in data, for example. So do we have the best data to make the best decisions? How can we trust that that the data we're responding to is right? And then you see the other side of it as well, that we talk about, breakdown in communications and growth of cynicism when we work in that space where people become more disconnected. And what's the role of technologies like social media, artificial intelligence? How do they all come together in this space of the emergency management sector, so that we need to know how to work with those and use those technologies, as well as work with relationships and people and trust, so that we're really working towards building and sustaining that trust, which is at the heart of our work that we do in disaster risk resilience and in the emergency management sector. So you can see the challenge over there that we've articulated. And it's really about, how do we build and maintain that trust? So in a world where trust is both vital and fragile, how can we build and sustain trust across our whole society to drive the collective and coordinated actions that are fundamental to reducing the risks and impacts of disasters and strengthening the safety, sustainability and resilience of all Australians? So that's our challenge. And so the way that we present that challenge is you'll all bring your different skills, interests and experience to that question. And so now the challenge is to think about what part of that can you solve? What is a real, describing that problem that you can address, and then describing how you can solve that problem. That's what the challenge is about. So how does the challenge itself run? So entries are open at the moment and will close on the 7th of July. So we'll talk a little bit more about that entry form. It's pretty easy to fill out the entry form, going to the Disaster Challenge website and entering there. So what happens then, we're looking for as many quality entries, and people working together and collaborating is really important. This year, the challenge is open to teams in particular rather than individuals. So we really want to promote that collaboration between people with different skill sets, with different abilities and different thoughts and perspectives on what trust means within the emergency management sector. We'll have a little bit of an exercise for that a little bit later on. So those entries are open now. You can find more detail about that at the website. Have a look at the entry form, follow the guide for entrance, and you'll see that it's really about identifying what that problem is you're going to solve and then describing the solution of how you're going to do it. So those entries are open until the 7th of July. There'll be a judging process after those entries close over the course of July to identify 3 finalists, as we mentioned before. And those 3 finalists will then go into a development phase and a mentoring phase to really help develop that idea and that pitch. You know, what is it? What is the problem? What is the solution? What does that look like? And so we'll put some pitch development, a bit of way to think about those kind of things, work with some industry mentors, and so build that kind of idea up over August and September. And then the phase 3 of the disaster challenge final. So that's going to be over here, Western Australia, so close to Perth, in an event on the 3rd or 4th of October. And those 3 finalist teams will be taken over to Perth for that event, and that'll be pitching your idea and your problem and your solution in front of a judging panel at the event over here. So that'll be done live, and the idea then will be that the judging panel would choose the winner out of that. So there's 3 phases. Entries are open at the moment till the 7th of July. 3 finalist teams will go into a mentoring and pitch development process for August and September. And then the start of October, we'll have the disaster challenge final, and the winner will be determined from their pitches at the event. So I touched on it before. So how can you approach a wicked problem? So if you think back to, you know, that idea of, you know, how do we build and sustain trust in the emergency management sector? These wicked problems, as I mentioned, they're big, they're complex, there's lots of moving parts. There's not really one solution. So what we really need to do is break them down into pieces that we can solve. And so that's the first part of problem statement. Starting to think about and describe that specific problem that your entry seeks to address. What is that problem? And those are elements of it. Why is it a problem? Why is it important? And why does it remain unsolved? Why addressing it requires new and innovative solutions? So that's what we want to think about, really articulating that problem before we get to the solution phase. Once we've got articulated that problem, we can start to think about the solution, and then you can start to describe it. How will your solution address the problem? You know, how does your approach make disaster response better? And how does it build and sustain trust? How do you know it'll work? What evidence do you have to support the way that your solution will work? And how is your approach different to what's already been tried? So this is really an innovation challenge, right? We don't want to try the same things that haven't worked before. What are the new ideas that we can bring to these? And so, you know, they're the solution part, and then thinking about how do we then, you know, what does the future of this idea look like? If it's affordable, people can use it. If it's adaptable, it'll be used across the sector. If it's scalable, more and more people can start to use it. So they're the kind of things we'll explore a little bit as we build those ideas, particularly for the finalist team. So how do you enter the challenge? I mentioned before, you can go to the Disaster Challenge website. You'll find all the links there, and that'll take you to the entry form. Other important documents you might want to have a look at: the guide for entrance, which talks a little bit more in detail about what we're talking at the moment, terms and conditions, so you understand where the challenge is, what it's about, how it works. Importantly for this challenge, they said, get your team together. So it's not a challenge for individuals this time around, it's certainly for collaboration. So we want to have at least 2 people working together to bring their ideas together, build on those ideas to make the best solutions. Spending time to understand what the wicked problem is and why it is so difficult to solve, and what's your piece of that you can solve. So think about how you'd address the wicked problem, what piece you can solve. Bringing up your ideas, which you'll find when we think about the problems part and then we think about the solution part, that thinking will map straight onto the entry form. And there's a couple of ways you'll see that you can do that. They're either written or you can do a video entry as well. Importantly, addressing those key points of the problem statement and then the solution. And you'll find more detail on that if you go to the website, the guide for entrance and the entry form. So that's a little bit about the challenge. That's about addressing the challenge. You know, now we want to think about, to help you think about a bit more about what does this challenge actually mean. We've seen the written version, but We want to talk, get those perspectives from a couple of representatives of the emergency management sector and a couple of the people who've been involved in the steering committee that put this challenge together and defined it for 2024. The first, we'll get a little video that was prepared by Associate Professor Jonathan Abrahams from Monash University. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here, but he's been doing a lot of thinking about, what does trust mean? He's a fellow who's worked at the UN level, World Health Organization, and a lot of those kind of disaster recovery programs, looking at community health, how those kind of things impacted. So he has a very high level of experience around in the UN level, and now he's the director of the Monash University Disaster Resilience Initiative. So he's thought about a lot of these things, and what he's going to provide now is a bit of a thought about the challenge and, the importance of trust. So let's have a listen to what Jonathan has got to say.
I'm Jonathan Abrahams. I'm from the Monash University Disaster Resilience Initiative, and my experience in emergency management goes back to when I was working in Veterans Affairs on mental health programs for veterans, and also with Emergency Management Australia in the 1990s. And throughout my career, I got to say that as in life, respectful, trustful relationships have been vital to everything and anything that's worked well. And of course, telltale signs for something that was not going to work well have been when individualism, ego, and mistrust have gotten in the way of collective action, of people working together effectively. And that's resulted in tragic and avoidable impacts on people's lives, their livelihoods, the environment, and other assets or aspirations, values that communities have. So I'm privileged to be a member of the 2024 steering group for the Natural Hazards Research Australia Disaster Challenge. I'm happy to be working with professional colleagues from academia, from policy, from practice, and of course working with the members of the NHRA team, with Brendon, with Vicky, with Nathan, and everybody who's making this challenge possible. So as you probably have heard or will hear, there's obviously many challenges and wicked problems that we could set for this particular year. We've landed on this one, and we've done our best to frame it as succinctly as possible. If I were a member of a team entering this challenge, I'd be asking myself some pretty challenging questions. For example, how does our team understand the problem and the challenge that's been set? How could we investigate the challenge? How can we consult with others to get an understanding of their perspectives on this particular challenge? And they could come from across our communities, across our society. What are some of the key words in the challenge statement that's been set? And how do we sustain and build trust in our communities, in our relationships, and across all of society, and for what purpose and to what end? So evidence and research contribute very much to community safety, to community resilience, to climate change adaptation, to emergency and disaster risk management. It's important also to emphasize that this is very much a practical exercise to address a very practical challenge facing our communities. So how will our teams proposed solutions and our ideas, how will they contribute practically to improving outcomes and impacts for communities or subpopulations, given that we have very diverse communities here in Australia? So whilst the task is couched as a problem and as a particular challenge, how can our solution put attention on strengths and opportunities? While we're often talking about risk as a source of harm, it's also important to say that risk is also an expression of opportunity, of innovation, of progress, of ways by which we can incentivize the way that risk can be managed effectively. And whilst we often use the term emergency and disaster, it's not just about preparing for, responding to, and recovering from such events. It's also how will our solutions contribute to prevention, to mitigation, to lessening the risks, and to stopping the emergencies and disasters from occurring in the first place. So it's very clear that we have many actors in our communities who are contributing to community safety, to sustainability, and to resilience. So how will our solutions help build trusting, effective relationships amongst those actors? How can they be sustained as well? How will we address trust and trustworthiness? Is it sufficient to say that this is a two-way street? How will our solutions address the multiplicity of actors who are in our communities contributing to emergency and disaster risk management? Or are we going to focus on a particular issue, a set of actors, or a particular niche of emergency and disaster risk management that we really want to focus on? How, and of course asking the question, why is that important? You need to be able to convey that to us very effectively. So how might these relationships that we develop in emergency and disaster risk management also be a force for good in society at large? How could they contribute to social cohesion and other aspirations for our communities? And how could these relationships or how will these relationships need to build on existing relationships in our communities and societies? So we haven't set this challenge because we know the answers or the solutions, far from it. What we're looking for are your creative, evidence-based, innovative, but practical solutions for community safety, for community resilience, and sustainability of communities and for all Australians. So it's exciting for you to participate as a team to address this particular challenge. In effect, you will be practicing trustful, respectful relationships to ensure that your team comes together to work effectively, to collaborate on putting this submission together on your application to address this challenge. But equally for us who are in the steering group, we're excited. I'm excited to be on the receiving end of your proposals. We're really looking forward to you taking on this year's challenge and putting in your submissions. And from many perspectives, from your perspective as individuals, from a team perspective, from the emergency management community, and from the Australian society as a whole, we're all going to be winners out of this exercise. So thank you very much for taking on this particular challenge, and good luck, and I wish you very well. Thank you.
Very good. So you've got a really thoughtful interpretation of the problems there from Jonathan, and what the challenge is about, and the important reasons that we want to be going and solving that kind of challenge. Thank you very much, Deb and Kerry. So I'll let you give a little bit of an introduction to yourselves and to your role in the challenge.
Thank you very much. My name is Deb Parkin. I'm the General Manager of Business Services with the Inspector General for Emergency Management in Victoria. Just to give you some perspective, Inspector General is an independent statutory role that provides assurance to the Victorian government and the community so that people can feel confident that the emergency management arrangements are working as they should. And one of our key goals is to promote continuous improvement in the sector. Now, just to give you a really basic breakdown, if you think of all of the response agencies, fire, ambulance, SES, etc., they sit at the operational level. Then within Victoria, we have Emergency Management Victoria, which sits over the top of those response agencies. and coordinates the state response capability and delivery of those services. IGEM, if you like, sits across the top, and we work directly at the systems level. So we make sure everything works from the delivery on the ground to the way the government operates and policy perspective, to make sure the whole system operates as it should. We review, assess and evaluate Victoria's emergency management arrangements. We monitor the implementation of agreed recommendations from any evaluations and reviews. We also closely monitor everything but the finances of 000 Victoria and critical infrastructure providers, and observe sector activities and committee meetings across the board. Now, the reason I give you that concept is that we have the global view within Victoria in regards to the emergency management sector. The more important thing in relation to this discussion, however, is I'll introduce Kerry, my colleague, who's the Senior Evaluation and Review Officer, and she's actually the person that came up with the original idea for this wicked problem. So she's very well placed to talk about the perspective of the sector in relation to this activity. So I'll pass over to Kerry now.
Thanks, Deb. Coming to you from Jaja Wurrung country in central Victoria. So I guess if we think about why trust is an important part of the EM sector, so people working in emergency management need to trust each other to get the job done. So that's during an emergency, but also beforehand and afterwards. So we often hear that relationships and relationship building is a critical part of emergency management in Victoria. So this includes relationships between agency personnel, but also between agencies, community service organisations, councils and communities. So in one sense, like doctrine is one part of the picture. So that's things like shared plans, procedures, those sorts of documented arrangements. And then relationship building is the other part of the picture in emergency management. So if we think about some of the challenges with trust that we might see in the sector, so obviously building relationships takes time, particularly if agencies are experiencing a turnover of staff. And it can be difficult to maintain levels of trust with personnel changes. And also still thinking about the relationships between agency personnel. If there's confusion about who is responsible for doing what and when, that can weaken relationships and erode trust. So it can also be challenging for emergency management agencies, which includes government departments, to build mutual trust with individuals and communities. So agencies want to empower people to take responsibility for their own safety and not create dependence. And I'll come back to that point in a minute. And that's challenging because, of course, communities are made up of so many different individuals and groups with diverse needs, capabilities and expectations. And we've seen that bad experiences during or after an emergency can colour people's perceptions of agencies and government. So if we come back to that idea that agencies want to empower people to take responsibility for their own safety and not create dependence, so this comes back to the original idea, which is the concept of shared responsibility, which is really an emergency management sector concept. It's not really something that's common language in communities. It's not something that they espouse, I suppose, but it is a concept and a goal really of emergency management, and that is emergency services organisations can really only do so much, and they need individuals and communities to take responsibility for their own safety and for the safety of those in their communities and those that they care for, including their pets and stock. And last year, so where this idea came from is last year there were news articles about Victoria's Country Fire Authority's annual post-fire season community survey, and 44% of those surveyed think that the Country Fire Authority is responsible for protecting them and their homes during bushfires. And that just got me thinking about the pressure that places on our fire services and got me thinking about how can emergency services organisations encourage individuals and communities to accept responsibility. And then the panel ran with that idea, and they've come up with this concept of trust being a foundational part of building community resilience. So that's that story. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Brendon, I think we'll leave that there because I appreciate you want to pass over to the presentation, and then we'll take questions if there is any from anybody at a further down the track.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Deb, and thank you for that description, Kerry. That was really good. I really like the elements that you're talking about there, and you know that really heartfelt description of where this kind of comes from and why it's so important. If you'd like to put into the chat your name and interests and contact details, we also want to create a bit of a community around this event. So if you're looking for other people to work with and you'd like us to help make those kind of connections, then please put those into the chat, as well as any questions that you might as well have already thought of, and we'll get to those in our little Q&A session that's coming up in a moment. This is really about, you know, what's the idea, you know, saying this is the problem that we're addressing and really describing that idea. We don't need to build it at the moment. As I mentioned,
Perfect.
going through that kind of process of, you know, building that up towards a pitch event. You know, we might think about the concept of what does an MVP, a minimum viable product, look like, perhaps for some kind of demonstration at the end there, but certainly doesn't have to be a living, breathing thing at this stage. Thank you for your question, Nikisha, about app development. Are there any other questions from the floor and from attendees at the moment about, you know, and it can be anything. What is the challenge about? How do we enter the challenge? Any more questions about what your entries might need to look like? Let's have a little bit of back and forth, and happy to answer any of those questions at the moment.
Yeah, Brendon, so the question is, can we present a PhD research having our supervisor as a teammate?
Oh, depends. Oh, there's probably a couple of different parts to that. One part would be we want to make sure that it comes from undergraduates, postgraduates, early career researchers. So we'd like to ensure that the teams are formed, you know, from people who are in that space, people who are also involved in, you know, that can be through universities, it can be through TAFE, it can be through other related registered training organisations that are involved in those kind of pieces. So that might determine a little bit whether the supervisor can be involved in the team or not. In terms of using, basing your idea on your PhD research, there's nothing wrong with that. And indeed, you know, we're encouraging researchers to use what they know and what they're thinking about to solve these problems. The key part is we want to make sure that it's, you know, that it's linked to the problem. We want to identify that problem statement first. And then once we understand that problem statement, we can really start to talk about, you know, what's the solution. And if your PhD research is already part of that solution, then there's no reason that can't be involved.
Brendon, can I add something here? Just
Yes,
for something that I'd really I am a PhD academic in one sense, but I'm an practitioner, and I really, really would like to encourage all of you to just put a different spin and appreciating your goal here is not. I would recommend you think about it in this way. The goal is not to actually end up with an academic paper out of this or academic thing. One of the things we're trying to do really throughout NHRA is actually get people to understand how to take research and how to make it practical for the practitioner. The concept behind these ideas is research can be wonderful and be fantastic, but if it only ever sits in an academic paper on a shelf, and if it's not being implemented on the ground, if it's not actually something that can solve a problem and help a community in a way that, and picking up on the problem before, it might be at this stage just conceptually, a conceptual idea that you're presenting, but always keep in mind that it's something that you actually want to have implemented or be able to be applied at a practical level. So whilst this is an academic activity, it's more than what you are taught to do when you're doing your research process. This is about trying to look at ways as well to make research and academic thinking applicable on the ground and in communities. If you want to solve problems, then they have to have a practical outcome in this type of environment. So I just kind of want to add that thinking into the mix. It's wonderful to say, look, I'm going to read all of these books and do this. The other thing I encourage you to do is actually speak to people in communities, speak to end users, as the term we like to use, but more than that, speak to agencies, speak to people on the ground and practitioners that can help influence and guide you in your thinking. So that's something I really encourage here.
Great, thank you very much, Deb. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that, you know, really, we're talking about getting that research into practice and combining that with passion to make a difference. I think that's really important. One of the other functions of today's online briefing was really, if you're interested in the challenge, we've got to want to work in a team and might find some teammates that you want to work with. That's something we want to provide that opportunity to as well. And so I mentioned, if you're interested in doing that, put your name, your interests, and a contact email into the chat. That way we can connect people. What we're going to do now is encourage that meeting some other people. So we're going to go and do a little exercise, which I call a yes and exercise, and it's a little thinking exercise to help them open up our thinking and start to share ideas with people.
Brendon, there's another question from Udaya. Yep.
Let's go to that question first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the exercise.
The question is, can I join the challenge without the team?
So this challenge is really about, we wanted to emphasize the need for collaboration and for teamwork to really solve these complex challenges across the EM sector for this kind of one. So we really, we want to involve teams. So teams should have 2 or more people really working together rather than individual entries for this time round. And so we're thinking about that. This is what we want to do now, is encourage people to be able to meet some other people. We're going to do a yes and exercise. I'm going to call on my colleague Ethel just to give you an example of what this might look like. So this is yes and exercise is really about opening up your thinking and sharing ideas. In this first example, I'm going to ask Ethel, I'm going to talk about a birthday party, and her response is going to be no, because. Right, and I want you just to listen how that kind of goes. So Ethel, I think we should get a birthday party together, which is going to have about 20 people.
No, because it's too expensive.
What about if we just use cheap paper plates and things like that, and we can limit it to 10 people?
No, because it's not my birthday.
Well, I think we could have a party anyway. Like, it could be just because it's like a full moon party, or it could be just because it's a really nice day.
No, probably next week.
All right. So you get that idea and hear that kind of conversation. So it's a bit stilting, it's a bit halted. Now what we want to do is we'll have a similar conversation, but now Ethel's answers are going to be yes and. So Ethel, I think this weekend we should have a bit of a birthday party. It should be for about 20 people.
Yes, because it's a sunny day tomorrow.
Yeah, and we should just have a party. We've got lots of friends we haven't seen them for a while, so let's bring them all together.
Yes, because it will be fun.
That's it. It will be fun. And we get all those people together. We'll have music, probably clowns, and it'll be great.
Yes, because I'm bringing my child.
Excellent. So thank you very much for that, Ethel. The idea there is to see what we can do when we add conversations on together. So in the spirit of adding conversations on together, and I note there's a couple of questions that we'll get to, we're going to put people into breakout rooms now. And what your idea is to introduce yourself, say, hi, I'm this person, I'm interested in these kind of things, a quick introduction, and then someone to start saying, well, this is my idea for how we could build and sustain trust in the emergency management sector. Then it will be up to someone else to say yes and to build onto it. So we'll spend about 3 or 4 minutes doing that, see how we go, and then we might come back, wrap up, answer any more questions that you might have. So now what's going to happen is that Ethel and Varna are going to distribute herself into breakout rooms. So we'll be with a couple of different people for a few minutes, and let's explore that idea of yes and throwing ideas together.
Sorry, Brendon, one more question before we have the breakout rooms. From Genevieve, can people from government agencies other than emergency services be a teammate? Example, Department of Education.
And certainly that's the case. We want to bring lots of different thinking and lots of different perspectives together. The key here is really being associated into the research sector. So as an undergraduate, postgraduate, an early career researcher, or continuing on that training within the emergency management sector at something like TAFE or a registered training organisation. They're the key parts rather than what your experience is or what your knowledge base is. It's really about making sure that the important parts for this challenge this year round is that we're connected into that research sector. There's more details on that you'll find in the guide for entrance as well.
One more question, sorry.
One more question.
From Katie. If the solution we are presenting for the challenge, let's say an MVP that helps with operational decisions, do we need to present case study? If not, would presenting them add value?
So I think part of the idea, if we've got if we have a solution, we want to be able to demonstrate that yes, this solution works. Yes, this solution is right, and you can see the value in it. So if you have a case study where you've applied your methodology or your app has been really helpful, then those are the kind of things that help to build up the quality and the comfort around the idea that you're presenting. So we're thinking about it at some stage. If you get through to the final presenting to judges, they're exactly the kind of things that's going to provide that assurance to the judges that this is a good idea. And you're welcome to summarise them in the application process as well, to actually start, when you start talking about your idea in this first round of entries. Let's go to our little yes and exercise. Remember what that's like. This is about meeting some other people that you might want to work with, and it's about putting your first idea out there and building up on it. So we'll do that for a few minutes, then we'll pop back into the main room here and we'll wrap up.
Brendon, just while we're waiting for everyone to come back, if you don't mind, I'd like to address one of the questions that Genevieve posted in regards to, can people from government departments other than emergency services be a teammate? Using the yes and concept is perhaps what we think about is it's more than emergency services. It's actually emergency management is a much broader concept than just response agencies. It actually is local services that put in place recovery activities and those things. So it could be a much broader concept. So think about that element of community-based activities or community-based response, and they don't have to be government, which is what you were referring to before. They don't have to be a response agency per se.
Thank you, Deb. That's a fantastic clarification there. It's about having that research background and bringing that together. It doesn't matter where what your expertise is or which government department you're coming from. We want to get everybody to work together, right? That's certainly be there. I'm going to summarize just quickly because thank you for that. Thank you to everybody. This is what we're looking for. We talked about the ideas of the problem. Really start off understanding the problem. Then once you've got your solution, start to describe that. There's some really important elements of the solutions. This will all map into the entry form that you can find on the NHRA website. We'll talk a little bit about more in this week. There'll be another briefing this time next week. We will unpack the challenge a little bit more, and we'll talk about those kind of things, about getting in there, about thinking about the challenge, thinking about what our solutions might look like, and we'll talk a little bit more about what comes next. So understanding the problem. We'll talk about how we'll be judging entries. We'll talk about the mentoring program that finalists will go into, and we'll talk about really what's going to happen in this disaster challenge. And I'd like just to say thank you, everybody, for being involved online today. Apologies for some of the technical difficulties. Thank you to our guests, Deb Parkins Kerry Haby, for helping us through those technical challenges and providing some of those clarifications as well. Thank you, everybody, for being involved. If you want more information, you can go to the website or follow the emails there. I'd really like you to go and check out the guide for entrance. There's a lot of good information in there. And really think about how you can put your ideas into an entry into the disaster challenge. So thank you very much for being here today. We'll have, as I mentioned, another briefing which you can register for this time next week. We'll go over the challenge again, talk about a few different things, and hopefully we'll see your entries flowing in. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for being involved and your time today. Thank you to everybody, and we will talk more about the challenge soon. Go to the Disaster Challenge website and follow through some of the details there. Thank you very much.